Hey guys, and welcome to my channel, Time is But a Window. Now I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different this video. I'm going to be talking about the future of Counter-Strike and how it should be modernized. Now CSGO was released back in August 21st of 2012, and while it has gone through several renditions at this point, it's still on the Source 1 engine. So I think the very first question is, should CSGO be updated to the Source 2 engine? I mean, really when we think about it, there are three options. The first of which would be to port CSGO as it currently is over to the Source 2 engine. The next option would be to rebuild CSGO in the Source 2 engine as a remaster. And the third option would be to create a completely new version of Counter-Strike in the Source 2 engine. Alright, so what are the advantages and disadvantages of these options? Well, the first thing a lot of people are going to say about the Source 2 engine is better graphics, but that's not necessarily the case. What we do know is that the Source 2 engine does support Vulkan rendering. Now, one of the major advantages of this is it will offset some of the rendering costs to the GPU rather than just using CPU rendering. Now, this is important because, as you guys know, the Source 1 engine is very CPU oriented. For example, if you want a better frame rate in something like Counter-Strike, you really need a better processor rather than a better GPU. Now, the good thing about this is it usually keeps input latencies fairly stable and fairly low. Now, this may have been something that Valve really thought about before releasing CSGO originally, but it's been a long time since then and technology has gotten a lot better. So, for example, in CSGO, I have an input latency between about 10 milliseconds and 25 milliseconds, with everything being as optimized as possible. But that was before NVIDIA released something known as Reflex Low Latency Mode. Now in Valorant, with this setting on, I'm getting an input latency between about 4 milliseconds and 6 milliseconds. Now if you add the 2.2 milliseconds of click latency I get from my mouse, that is a total of 6 to 8 milliseconds of input latency. You can see how much better that is than what I get in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which is about 10 to 25 milliseconds. Now the good news is you don't need to upgrade to the Source 2 engine to implement this. So you don't technically need to upgrade to the Vulkan rendering. But if you do have Vulkan rendering and you do implement this, then you can have the best of both worlds. You can have the GPU put in work to take off load off the CPU while using reflex low latency to keep the input latency low. Thus, Valve really has no more performance reasons to keep CSGO on the Source 1 engine. And you'd think that would be enough for them to simply port it over to the Source 2 engine. After all, everyone wants a performance increase, so why not give it to them? Well, that brings the next part of this, which is the physics engine. It is completely different than how the physics engine works in the Source 1 engine. Back in an interview in 2017, when asked, Valve said that they were worried about porting the game over to the Source 2 engine because it would make the game feel like a completely different game. Now personally, I'm okay with this, but to be completely honest, I never really liked the mechanics of CSGO as much as prior incarnations of Counter-Strike. Now keep in mind, I started playing Counter-Strike way before 1.6, so I saw what an actual port of Counter-Strike could look like from 1.6 to Counter-Strike Source. The same game, the same mechanics on two different engines, and they felt completely different. Now at the time, this ended up splitting the community, and because of that, both communities nearly died after a few more years. So when CSGO came out, everyone made a pact to all switch over to CSGO no matter how bad it was, and at the beginning it was very, very bad. Now remember, CSGO was technically ported from the Source engine to the Source engine for consoles, so a lot of the mechanics were changed around a bit to make it work for console. Now in my opinion, the difference between gameplay from 1.6 to Counter-Strike Source was smaller than the difference between gameplay from Counter-Strike Source to CSGO, even though CSGO was technically on just an updated version of the Source 1 engine. Now today, CSGO is considered the most successful version of Counter-Strike ever. But that's not the whole story. After CSGO released, while everyone did make a pact to switch over from CS 1.6 and Source to CSGO, there's no real way to sugarcoat this, the game was bad. So bad that the numbers started to dwindle down farther and farther, dropping below 20,000 players. It looked like Counter-Strike may be officially coming to an end. But that's when Valve decided to do something that would change the market forever. They introduced skins and a skin market. And within 2 years, the game had over 1 million concurrent players at any given time. And this is why that third option I mentioned earlier is not possible. See, if Valve were to make a completely new version of Counter-Strike, they'd have to find a way to implement the skin market from the current version of CSGO. An easy way to think about it is think about CSGO skins being Bitcoins. And every time one of those skins is sold to another person, Valve gets a little bit of revenue from that. In fact, they got so much revenue from that, they were able to make the game free to play. In fact, I'd say that if we didn't have that market, we'd probably have had a new Counter-Strike version back in 2016 or 2017, because we have evidence of them working on multiple Counter-Strike games before canceling them. And that's also a sign that Valve doesn't really know what to do themselves. How do they keep that skin market alive while still keeping the game current? Alright, so they have done a couple things here to try to do so. For one, they overhauled the UI. They did this by backporting panoramic UI from the Source2 engine. This really helped the scoreboard look a lot better, and of course the main menu. After that, they rebuilt the main maps in the Source2 engine and then backported them back to the Source1 engine. They pretty much did this with all the competitive maps at this point, and that's why all of them look so much better than they originally did. For example, here's Old Dust 2 and New Dust 2. And this is what I was talking about when I was saying you don't really need to switch over to the Source2 engine to get better graphics. Now with just these changes alone, the game pretty much looked like a completely new game. The only thing they needed to do was update the models. Oh, and they did that too. But deep down, Valve knew there was something missing. After all, why give people models that they can have for free when they can charge them? Enter agent skins. With this, they were able to monetize the player models and add them to the skin market, while still maintaining their original purpose of updating the models to make them look more modern. And honestly, without changing any of the mechanics, just by all these visual upgrades they've done, CSGO is practically CSGO 2 by now. Which is disappointing for me since I did want to see a complete overhaul of CS, hoping that they'd change the movement mechanics a little bit. Because as an old school player, I'm still partial to the mechanics of CS Source and 1.6. And from that it looks like of all the 3 things I said they could do, what they ended up doing is building it in the Source 2 engine and then backporting it to the Source 1 engine to keep the mechanics. Which brings us to the next question. How far can they take this? How long can they continue to upgrade CSGO while staying on the Source 1 engine? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the commitment that Valve seems to have to keeping CSGO with its current mechanics and its current skin market are undeniable. They have put a lot more resources into maintaining it on the Source 1 engine than they would have spent to just port the game over. They've completely rebuilt Counter-Strike in the Source 2 engine just to backport it to the Source 1 engine. This is the Counter-Strike of the future. For better or for worse. As much as I would love them to redo the movement back to how it was in 1.6 and really change the mouse input so it doesn't feel like it's delayed. For anyone that doesn't know, the raw input in CSGO is bugged and has a frame delay buffer, which is really noticeable if you go from CSGO to another game like Valorant, or even if you go to something like Kovac Aim Trainer. Though I should mention that Kovac 2.0 does give you the option to turn on that frame buffer. So if you're training with that program, you can make your sensitivity feel exactly the same as it does in CSGO. As for the future of CSGO, it looks like they have added ray tracing support to the Source 1 engine, as well as VR support. So as far as the future of CSGO, it looks like the next thing they have planned is some ray tracing features. This is what ray tracing might look like in CSGO. Notice the ground reflections when it's turned on, and this will probably be the next major graphical update. But what other things can they do to future-proof CSGO? Well, as you guys know, they have been taking features from Valorant and bringing them over to CSGO. One thing I'd love to see is a massive buy menu overhaul, but I don't think that's going to happen because the last overhaul they did made it so you could see your own player model in the buy menu. Though instead of bringing over features like that, I'd like it if they implemented features like being able to right-click on a gun so someone could buy it for you. I know they added the whole thing where if you hit control and you click on a gun, it'll throw it to the ground without throwing yours to the ground, but that still means someone else could technically steal it if you buy it for someone specific. Now I know that I mentioned this earlier in the video, but one thing they really need to implement to future-proof this game is to implement reflex ultra-low latency mode. Seriously, Valve, what is the holdup? The only theory I have is that the Source engine is just too old for this. But like I mentioned earlier, they've been adding a lot of extra code to the Source engine to keep from having to upgrade CSGO to the Source 2 engine. So surely they'd be able to find a way to figure this out. Then of course there's always the anti-cheat. Oh wait, I'm not supposed to mention that one. While we do have some groundbreaking features like the Overwatch system, which can catch a few cheaters. Now in honesty, Overwatch is a pretty cool system, but it's not the most effective way to get rid of cheaters, especially in mass amounts. And as we all know, there are tons of cheaters in CSGO. which shows how easy it is to get around VAC these days. Then we have trust factor. This is a cool system in theory, but in practice it doesn't work out as well. Basically, what can happen here is the more you get reported, the worse your trust factor is. Every time you go to Overwatch and get cleared, your trust factor improves a little bit. But there are so many cases going to Overwatch from prime and non-prime accounts, which I'll talk about next, that if you continue playing well, it is more likely that your account will get lower and lower trust factor until eventually you're going to be playing against cheaters the majority of the time. And let's be honest, there are a lot more reports going out than Overwatch is clearing people. And I don't care who you are, you've probably been reported by at least one person who thought you were cheating at one time because you hit that lucky shot. And next, we have Prime accounts. Prime is a sort of paywall, but the problem with this paywall is if you're non-Prime, you can eventually earn Prime by playing enough games, even if you cheated in every single one of those games and still haven't been banned. So you can definitely see the flaws there without me going any farther. Now, the problem is, does Valve really want to get rid of the cheaters though? Because as you guys know, a lot of cheaters will buy skins. So how badly do they really want to get rid of cheaters, and are they willing to implement something that is a bit more invasive that would stop a lot more cheaters like Valorant has done? Well, maybe not quite that invasive. I'm not talking about having something that's always on, but at least when you're running Counter-Strike. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. So regardless if you're looking forward to a new version of Counter-Strike eventually being released, it looks like this is the Counter-Strike that's here to stay. As you can see from what we talked about in this video, Valve seems to have too much to lose by trying to move on to the Source 2 engine or remaster the game. Instead, they're just going to try to port whatever features they can into the Source engine until it's no longer possible. But at least they've shown that they've been interested in modernizing Counter-Strike by looking at features from other games like Valorant and trying to find ways to implement those features into this game as well, like the pinging system. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comments down below what kind of features you'd like to see them add to Counter-Strike. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, have a great day.